Hello and welcome to this episode of the Anna Asks podcast. You are with me, Anna Cusack, and today I'm going to give you a bit of a primer into the Omicron variant of the coronavirus. With Christmas coming up, with things looking very different here in New South Wales, especially with a new Premier, I think it's worth talking through what this is and what we might expect to happen over the next little while. So first detected in South Africa in November 2021, it's quickly becoming the dominant strain of the SARS-CoV-2, aka coronavirus, in the world. So I will ask a few questions that I wanted to know about and that I went and did my research and learnt from science educators, from physicians and doctors, and we'll give you that information here. So what is different about Omicron? Compared to the original strain of the virus, Omicron has around 50 mutations, and of these 30 are on the spike protein. 10 are on a key protein called the ACE2 receptor, which makes Omicron more likely to infect people. It also replicates itself in the body faster than previous versions, so we can become infectious to others sooner after infection ourselves, so even within 1 or 2 days after exposure to that positive person. It's spreading very quickly in Australia, and it's likely to take over as the dominant or most common strain here, although that doesn't automatically mean Delta will disappear. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. One thing that we've heard a bit is that Omicron might be milder than previous variants. The experts have their fingers crossed, but are saying it's still too soon to tell. Early signs from South Africa are that a smaller percentage of infected people are needing hospital care with Omicron, and those who did stayed for a shorter time and were less likely to progress to ICU. There are a couple of factors that might complicate the issue though. Prior to Omicron, around 70% of the South African population had experience with defending itself against either COVID-19 through prior infection or vaccination. So the stats that we're hearing from those South African hospitals may reflect better immunity against severe disease rather than a less dangerous virus itself. By comparison, Australia has about 81% of its total population with some degree of immunity through infection or vaccination. We also don't know how an ageing population here might affect these statistics. So the average age in South Africa is 27.6 years, whereas in Australia it's 37 years. Will being double vaccinated or having a previous COVID-19 infection stop us from getting it? Unfortunately, we're still not 100% on this one either, but maybe not. Because Omicron has so many mutations, it is better at avoiding our antibodies, and these are the first line of defense against any infection. Both reinfections, where you're infected after having the coronavirus first time around, and breakthrough infections, where you're infected after being vaccinated, are more common with Omicron. So for example, 2 doses of Pfizer protects us against around 33% of infections from Omicron, compared to 70% of the older strains. Protection from 2 doses of AstraZeneca is potentially even lower again. So the further you get from that second dose, the lower your protection from infection. That doesn't mean that getting double vaccinated was a total waste of time. Because the immune system is complex, the other parts that kick into gear once an infection has been detected do exactly that. These deeper immune responses are likely to protect you against severe disease from both Delta and Omicron for around 5 or 6 months after your second dose. The purpose of vaccination remains the same: reduce likelihood of you being infected, getting sick and ending up in a hospital bed that a more vulnerable person needs. So 5 to 6 months before the protection against severe disease wanes for 2 doses. Is this why we're starting to hear more and more about booster doses? And the answer there is yes. So if you look at your kids' immunisation records, you'd see most diseases have a 3-dose course of vaccines to get that deep immune response optimally primed. What we're thinking of as booster doses for coronavirus are more like 3rd doses, and they bring that waning antibody immunity right back up as well as more deeply rooting in your complex immune response strategies. So 3 doses of Pfizer will bring you back up to about that 70% protection from being infected in the first place, which drops down to 33% with only 2 doses. So current advice in Australia is for a 3rd dose 5 months after your 2nd dose. If you're immunocompromised, that time frame is 2 months after your 2nd dose. In the UK, they've actually reduced that gap for all adults down to 3 months and have recently prioritised pregnant adults, as they have been shown to have a much greater risk of hospitalisation and poor outcomes, both for the person who's pregnant and their baby. There's no word yet if this will happen here in Australia too, but I think it would be a good idea if that does happen. But that's just my personal opinion. Does it matter which vaccination or which vaccine you use when you get your 3rd dose? So what we're seeing so far is that the mRNA vaccines, so that's Pfizer or Moderna, are the better ones for 3rd doses. But if there's a contraindication, which means a medical reason that you can't have those, you can get a 3rd AstraZeneca. Moderna's 3rd dose fared slightly better in its clinical trial compared to Pfizer's 3rd dose, but only by a couple of percentage points. So the current recommendation is to go with whichever is available to you and or recommended by your health team as soon as you're eligible for it. All 3 vaccines are considered safe for people who are pregnant at any stage of pregnancy, as well as people who are lactating and trying to conceive as well. One thing I have been considering as a parent myself of a child under 5 is what Omicron means for kids in the under 5 age group, given they can't get vaccinated yet. So there was an early concern that more 0 to 4-year-olds with Omicron were ending up in hospital in South Africa than previous waves. With further investigation, it was found that more children already in hospital for other reasons were testing positive, and their Omicron symptoms were mostly mild. So hopefully this trend continues, as vaccines for this age group are unlikely to be available until mid-2022. Here in New South Wales, our Health Minister Brad Hazzard said we could see 25,000 cases a day in January. If we don't know how serious Omicron is yet, I am not convinced as to why we're seeming to let it rip. I think that what you're seeing in action is what happens when economists decide public health policy rather than public health experts. To do away with social distancing, reject any thought of further lockdowns, get rid of density limits, masks at indoor venues for most people, and QR and check-in codes, while many vulnerable Australians haven't had their 3rd dose, while our 5 to 11 year population haven't had a chance to have their vaccinations yet, for those families who want to do that at peak travel time of the year, and while Omicron is taking off, is really unlikely to go well, in my opinion. Even if a tiny proportion of adults, say 1 or 2% of these, need hospital care, that is still a lot of people needing care at 25,000 cases a day. When you consider positive cases and need for sick leave or close contact isolation among the hospital staff population, we're in real strife. Translate this to daycare and school settings, disability and aged care environments, food supply, transport chains, face-to-face services in post offices, banks, etc. It's not going to be pretty, particularly with hardly any disaster support payment options for people meant to be isolating and small businesses. This is a part of our capitalist, individualist culture that means care work is devalued in favour of productive industries, productive in quotation marks there, forgetting that those very industries are reliant on care. It also puts the impetus for taking care of yourself on individuals while providing an environment where it's near impossible to do so, then scolding them for being so irresponsible. It's dangerous and lazy on the part of our politicians. I realise we can't live locked down forever, but I do think this could be done much more sustainably with more care for human life. Please do what you can to look after each other over the next little while. It's not that hard to wear masks inside even when you don't have to anymore. It's not that hard to have Christmas lunch in the shade outside at a bit of a distance where ventilation is good. Because in my opinion, the state and federal political leaders are not doing the job of looking after each other at this point in time. So unfortunately, it falls back to us. Take care over Christmas, and I will be back in the new year with a whole lot of special guests to bring you hopefully more uplifting news than what is in this podcast. See you then. Just letting you know as well that if you would like to share this podcast or you would prefer to read it, a full transcript is available on my blog at www.annacusack.com.au/blog. I would also like to remind you that this is general and informative in nature and does not replace any conversations or advice that you may have and receive from your medical team and medical practitioners. This review or opinion piece was compiled after listening to a lot of ABC CoronaCast podcasts with Dr. Norman Swan, which is a daily podcast that is on hiatus over this Christmas period, but has been hugely informative over the duration of the pandemic so far. It's also been informed by some preprint studies, which are not yet peer-reviewed, that can be freely accessed online from researchers looking into the Omicron variant, and from a number of science educators. If you are on Instagram, the following accounts may be really interesting to you as well. So at deplatformdisease, at the wholesome doctor, at dr.risa Hiroshina, and at pandemic pregnancy guide. I'll include those in the show notes for you. We'll see you next year. Thanks for listening to this episode of Anna Asks. If you'd like to support this podcast and contribute to the payment of the diverse guests we learn from, please head to www.annacusack.com.au/podcast. While you're on the website, you can click around and grab my book, Mama You're Not Broken, download my free 6 Steps to Your Peaceful Postpartum e-guide, or check out ways we can work together. Let's continue the conversation on Instagram and Facebook too, at Anna Cusack Postpartum. Remember to hit subscribe on your podcast app, and until next episode, bye for now.